gentlemen, and disappointments. We are coming to you live from the Woman Caves in New York and Connecticut. My name is Leslie.
And my name is Melissa.
And we are Verbally Disastrous. Hello, everyone. This is Leslie, and I am your host of the Verbally Disastrous podcast. The topic for this episode is about the time I powered through working with the tools while being pregnant with my now 16-year-old son, Johnny. One of the hardest and craziest things I ever attempted to do was to work on railroad platforms and other construction projects while I was pregnant. By the time I was around 29 years old, I knew that I wanted to have a child before I passed the 30-year cutoff mark. I had my eldest son at 19 years old after getting married at the age of 18 years old. Sadly, my husband died in a motorcycle accident 2 years into our marriage. At the time of his father's passing, Thomas was only 18 months old. I worked multiple jobs to keep a roof over our head and buy basic things for the house that I didn't have. During that time, I was not trying to have any more children. The costs of daycare alone were killing me. I absolutely could not imagine paying for daycare for more than one child. I was trying to survive and not become homeless with my son. I also was not out there trying to date either. When it came to trying to date, I felt like an emotionless zombie. It took me quite a few years to heal from losing my husband. I wasn't the type to get super emotional and cry about my loss. It was fair to say that still waters ran deep during that silent struggle in my mind. I didn't have anyone to talk to about my emotions during that time. Sadly, there was not a single soul around that I felt comfortable enough to share my emotions with them. I worked internally to sort this out over the years. I used to work to serve as a distraction to escape from my own sad thoughts. My goal was to work a lot to distract myself from the mental anguish. I felt pressure to get past this emotional ditch that I was stuck in. At the time, I didn't know how to navigate the pits of my despair. I knew at the time my son Thomas wanted me to find him a father. He most certainly wanted to have a sibling too. He would let me know in his own way that a family was his deepest wish. He used to point men out to me as a toddler. He even tugged on a man's jacket in the gas station while he was standing in front of us at the counter paying for his gas. The man turned around and Thomas looked up at him and responded, "Hey, do you want my mom's phone number? It is 914-444-4444. I must have had the look of utter shock and embarrassment on my face when I realized he had actually given out the house number. Yes, this was an era when we memorized phone numbers and cell phones did not exist for broke citizens such as myself. Thankfully, the man flashed Thomas a grin, thanked him, and walked out of the gas station. I couldn't even be mad at him for that. It was funny despite feeling shy and mortified upon the realization. It took me about 5 years to allow myself to open the door for the possibility of a relationship. I had met on the job site a guy who heavily pursued me to date him. I actually agreed to a museum date with my son and my date's son. This was a huge mistake, since this outing gave Thomas the first man for him to campaign for as a new potential dad for him. He would often ask for him and tell me that I need to go meet up with him again. He appeared to be a family man and a kind person to me back then, so I allowed myself to be open to the relationship. After 3 years into the relationship, I had the discussion with my new now boyfriend about having a child together. I wasn't ready to get married. I got a lot of ribbing about that from some family members. I owned a home and had my own little growing empire. I wasn't compelled to put my assets out on the chopping block in the event of a divorce. Some may argue that this should have been my cue to walk away. Then again, are you ever really ready to give up half of everything to someone you love if the relationship fails? I wonder if I would have abandoned the baby plan if he had insisted on marrying me. The good thing was that he was most certainly interested in having a child with me without having to get married. I remember his mother was thrilled, and she was saying that she wanted a girl. I was in such a weird mindset during that time frame when I think back. I felt like I had a great relationship with him, but not enough to take the leap and make it official. I just wasn't feeling the whole getting married thing. What I should have done was listen to my gut and walk away from the relationship, despite my son wanting it. I foolishly allowed that chatter of the biological clock to control my major choices. By this point in time, I had worked with the tools in the union for about 9 years. I had anticipated that my choice to have another child would be a challenge while working with the tools. I also greatly feared that attempting to have a child much later than 30 years old could give major health problems for either me or the baby. I had this thought in my head of having a child before 30 years old. As I said before, I don't think anyone could have swayed me at the time. At the age of 29 years old, I was in pretty good shape. When I was 19 years old and in the military, I was in absolute tip-top shape. Giving birth to my eldest son was much easier on my body. I envisioned getting older and feared having to juggle work and a pregnancy as an uphill battle. In hindsight, I should have had a firm conversation with my partner about picking up the slack for me during this time frame before I even decided to get pregnant. Admittedly, I didn't speak up and opted to try to work as long as possible because I wanted to rely on myself. Because I didn't speak up, he didn't bother to offer to help with any gaps in income. One of the many lessons learned during that relationship. I have always taken great pride in being able to handle things without asking for help. It has absolutely nothing to do with proving that I don't need a man. I had no choice but to sink or swim after becoming a widow. I refused to go back to Oregon and move in with my mother and my sister. I had just used a settlement from a car accident to buy my first house 6 months before my husband passed away. Besides, I truly get a great sense of satisfaction whenever I accomplish a task solo with my own hands. The more challenging the task, the more satisfaction I get from accomplishing it. The older I get, the less I want to face challenges. I prefer the easier, more stable life path. Even if I wanted help, there was no one to offer it. I'm sure that my choice to learn how to perform tasks solo was a survival tactic. Perhaps I don't truly know the answer if my pride does not even allow me to pose the question in the first place. Back when I was married, I was the dutiful wife that made lunches, sewed things in need, paid the bills on time, and was on top of keeping everything clean and organized. Even as a wife, I took care of many things and didn't totally rely on my husband. Instead, he relied heavily upon me to take care of everything. I did rely on my in-laws back when I first left the military and came to New York. That dependent lifestyle didn't last long since it was time to go out on my own. You don't realize how hard it is to have your own place until you make that first leap. I was grateful for what help was offered from my in-laws to get on my own 2 feet. Gaining independence is hard when you take on minimum wage jobs. You are then required to take on multiple jobs that each do not pay well. My rainbow on the horizon to look forward to was my future pay as a journeywoman electrician. I just needed to stick it out and jump the hurdles to the best of my ability that popped up in my path along the way. I struggled with the lack of sleep while on this new grind. That lack of getting those precious Z's was by far the hardest thing of dealing with young children as a career woman. I feel like it takes about 7 years after a child is born before you can sleep in on a Saturday. Of course, this is coupled with a lack of funding. I remember the realization that I needed to put in more hours at another job. I did an assessment initially when I received my first paycheck after taxes. I believe that my check was $234 for 35 hours. That was like the standard hours that would often be on a project. Every once in a while, it'd be a PLA job that offered 40 hours. Nowadays, there's more 40-hour projects, but back then, 35 hours was the going rate. Meanwhile, my daycare lady was making $150 a week off of me. Rain or shine, that bitch. I was able to eke by with both of our paychecks. I opted to pick up a summer job to create an emergency cushion once I had a break from both my business degree courses and my apprentice studies. My husband died towards the end of the summer of 1996. I had to keep the summer job and carve it around my apprenticeship class and business courses. As soon as class was over, I ran to work the second job until midnight. I even picked up a third gig for a period of time. I had to quit when I got busted hiding my son in the kitchen while I worked. What a crime, right? What a crime. I wanted to kill that broad who fucking ratted me out. The day I passed my Connecticut E2 electrical license 4 years later was the day that I could quit all the extra jobs. Mind you, I was still an overtime whore, as my coworkers used to joke about my thirst for overtime. It took me quite a few years until I felt it was safe enough to try to have another child. I offer a taste of my background not for any empathy or to cry as a victim. I believe that I was a warrior who faced the challenges and managed to survive and prevent us from being out on the streets. The background was so that you could get a better understanding of my anxiety of having another child. Sadly, I equate having a child with a deep financial and emotional struggle. I didn't get to enjoy my motherhood with Thomas since I felt like I was practically drowning the entire time. It is my hope that I get to retire healthy and enjoy my grandkids in a way that I missed as a struggling single mom. I was hoping to have a better time with raising my new baby 10 years after having my first child. I first made the decision by the age of 28 years old to go off my birth control that I was on for a decade. I actually really like the main side effect of the Depo-Provera shot that I received every 3 months. The main side effect was no period. Oh yeah, baby. It was super helpful to not have a period since I often had to deal with porta-johns that did not have any running water. I felt like one of the guys not getting that dreadful mess each month. I had assumed that just because I was on birth control for a decade, it may be a challenge to get pregnant. My boyfriend and I had an upcoming trip planned to cruise all of the Hawaiian Islands back in 2004. I had planned this trip the year before on a new Norwegian cruise ship that was called the Pride of America. I opted to go off my birth control in the spring of that year. A few weeks after coming back from Hawaii, I started getting wicked sick each morning. I went to work and powered through those nauseous feelings. We happened to be working in the Croton Harmon rail yard while using a lift with my partner Donnie. Donnie is a brother to me still to this day. He is known as Uncle Donnie by my two sons today. As per the request of my boys who adore him, we are breaking bread with Uncle Donnie at the end of this week. We were working together in the rail yard. He was up in the lift and I was handing him stuff from the ground. We work really well as a team since we would anticipate each other's moves and respond accordingly. I must have had some odd behavior since Donnie picked it up. He brought the lift down to the ground and asked me what was wrong with me. I initially tried to brush off his concerns. He looked over at me with a bewildered and concerned look and blurted out, "Les, are you pregnant?" I must have had the most wide-eyed look of shock on my face that totally gave the store away. I confessed that I was pregnant and asked him to not tell anyone about it. He said he would try his best to keep the secret. He then informed me that I was no longer getting into the lift. I agreed to stay on the ground and to try not to do the heavy work. I wanted to work as long as possible despite working outside in such harsh environments. I literally spent 5 years in this shop that had all of the hardest work as an electrician. We worked in manholes, temporary power for new projects, new power distribution equipment. In layman's terms, basically the electrical equipment that's used to power up everything, say in a very large building. Now we were also adding new electrical switchgear, airport work, setting light poles with a bucket truck, railroad projects, and other pretty cool projects. I liked working there since I had such a great crew of guys. I still keep in touch with quite a few of them today. I threaded so many sticks of 4-inch rigid conduit in a trench, it's not even funny. We worked on multiple Metro-North Railroad platforms that were along the 3 lines that run into both 125th Street Station in Harlem and Grand Central Station in Manhattan. The summers were intense with the heat and our winters were brutal in the months of January to March. This was especially true along the Hudson line that was roughly about 10 to 15 feet from the Hudson River. I spent quite a few winters on my back on a sheet of plywood over rocks underneath a platform, spinning rigid conduit onto racks we created under the brand new platforms with my chain wrench, of course. To my surprise, I was able to hide my pregnancy all the way up until I was 5.5 months along. I tried my best to hide my pregnancy with baggy clothes. Back in late summer to the fall, when Donnie figured it out that I was pregnant, we wrapped up that task in the rail yard. I went over to the Yonkers Reservoir that is right next to Yonkers Raceway and worked with this foreman named Larry. We worked on the installation of many 4-inch rigid conduits for this project. We had a trailer on site to shape up in and have our breaks. After either coffee break or lunch, we would then take the Jeep and drive out to the field. I remember that we had a heavy-set, somewhat useless apprentice named Tony on the job. I was trying to teach him how to build the plastic racks that the conduits sat in ahead of time. I was basically trying to get him to anticipate our moves in the trench and hand us stuff just as we needed them. We spent way too much time waiting on Tony to build something that we could have been doing it ahead of time. I told him to stop having his hands in his pockets while staring at us on the side of the trench like a lump of shit. This is a bad habit that I can't stand. That habit is very telling about a person's work ethic. My father always used to say that you could sweep up, clean up, organize stuff. You can do anything besides have your hands in your pocket. I find it humorous that my now adult son Tom hates that habit as well. When he was little, we called him either Thomas or Tommy. As an adult, he prefers Tom. The guys on the job call him Tommy, so he was stuck with his name on the job. Donnie is also a man that hates seeing a dude with his hands in his pocket, too. If Donnie was on that project, he would have motherfucked him up and down if he would have seen it. It was bad enough that we had to make do with another apprentice that went by the nickname Lucky. I plan to write a short story on Lucky in the near future. Not long after I found out I was pregnant, I also found out that I had toxemia. Toxemia causes your face and body parts to swell up due to the extra water that your body takes on. Now, instead of targeting and breaking the balls of the useless apprentice, Larry decides to break my chops. We were in the Jeep, and Larry started digging into me. "Leslie, you've been gaining weight lately. It is all over your face and body. You need to stop eating the Twinkies. You need to stop eating the Twinkies. They're not good for you. You just need to stop stuffing your face." My coworkers are laughing in a somewhat uncomfortable manner, almost awkward. I just sat in the back seat and grinned at Larry in the rearview mirror. I believe that I said one smart-ass comment. "You're right, I need to get rid of my obsession with Twinkies." I was internally fighting those angry pregnancy hormones big time. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs that he was a wrinkled, bitter old man and no chick actually wanted to fuck him. Like the good pregnant girl that I was at the time, I was not giving the store away as to what was actually going on. I opted to mostly keep quiet on that subject. I didn't want to accidentally give away the root cause of my new weight gain. The shitty part was that Larry would dig into me periodically about my weight gain. Meanwhile, I worked hard in the trench with my partner, Sulio. I never felt so tired and exhausted in my entire life. I had way more sweat dripping from my face and body as a pregnant woman versus under normal conditions. I felt like my hard hat was a pressure cooker lid. Despite how stressed my body felt, I kept spinning that 4-inch rigid in the trench with a rope. I would crack jokes with Sulio that it was so warm out today, he should be wearing his thong instead of all these clothes. He needed to wear a white thong and try not to get it dirty while in the trench. I tried to use those funny exchanges to distract myself from how exhausted I felt. In hindsight, I was either challenging myself to keep fit while pregnant, or I was dangerously close to having a heart attack. To my delight, after a few months of working in the trenches every day, I got to pack up and go work at a brand new nursing home in Lower Westchester County, New York. This was super helpful since winter was fast approaching. I was concerned about it snowing while having to work in the trench. Thank goodness I was avoiding a potential disaster while out in the icy, slippery trench conditions. I did get to a point by the time I was on this job where I had to confess about my condition. I could tell that the general foreman on the job didn't like that I was pregnant, but he had to deal with it for the time being. A few people had suspected that I was just gaining a bunch of weight. I had a few coworkers, especially my partner Sulio, who were pissed that I didn't tell them that I was pregnant. I did my best to sit on the floor and install electrical heaters. By the time late winter approached, I had heard that the boss was trying to get some workers to go back out to the Yonkers Reservoir trenches to continue on that project. I know it was suggested that a couple of older guys on the job should go out to work the trenches. Of course, they said that they were not a good fit for that project. People that should have went out there should have been young people. I wondered, why would they try to send out older fellas to a project? Within our society here in the United States, we don't protect our aging workforce. We tend to chew them up in their younger years and then try to discard them. I wasn't surprised at all to see how the men were trying to turn down the outside work. It was the same nonsense as the county jail I shared in a previous short story when I volunteered to work at the hot and sweaty side of the jail. If I wasn't pregnant, I would have gone back out to the trenches. Perhaps I would have not sweated as much as I did when it was hot out. By this point in my pregnancy, I would have been a fool to volunteer to go back there. The asshole general foreman on the nursing home job didn't even tell the boss that I was pregnant. He just told them that I refused to go work at the trenches. However, I didn't know that at the time. I was just accepting my fate that I was going down the road because there was no other place to go. I dialed up Donnie to tell him that I was getting laid off that day for refusing to go to the trenches and to say goodbye. I guess Donnie called up our big boss to tell him that I was pregnant, and that is why I refused to go to the trenches. The asshole general foreman goes to try to hand me my final check with the layoff slip. It was at that time that the shop steward grabbed the envelope from my hand, opened up the envelope, ripped the layoff slip into a million pieces right in front of the general foreman. The look on that asshole's face was amazing. The shop steward pulled me to the side and apologized to me for the almost bad layoff. He told me that I was going to be transferred to the railroad project along the Hudson line. He also said he was going to go there as well. It was time to pack up and head outside for the month of December of 2004. I then met the new general foreman, Harry, who seemed like a fair guy who just wanted you to work efficient and not complain. I felt him giving me the analytical stare while smoking his big fat cigar. I then met his right-hand guy, Hank, during this same time period. I remember being nervous about how long I would last in this outside environment. Despite his large stature and brute strength, Hank appeared to be a gentle giant. We would go on to become good friends who would meet up periodically for dinner and some home cookouts over the last 15 years. Hank will be joining my sons and Donnie for our upcoming dinner this week. I got set up to be the person who was up on the platform with the pipe threader and the tri-stand. I was receiving field measurements from a few team of guys and cutting the different sizes of rigid pipe, stainless steel strut, and threaded rod. I started to struggle with bending down to pick up the pipe and strut. After all, I was between 29 to 34 weeks. I cannot remember at what point I packed in, but I was pretty far along in my pregnancy by then, so I created a system where I would use my feet to kick up the strut or the conduit so I can catch it. I would use my feet to both raise and lower both the pipe and the strut and the threaded rod to the ground. I still used that method after no longer being pregnant to limit bending and twisting because of my back problems later on. I have now earned some bulging discs and constant muscle spasms for my choices to work hard in my youth. Hank really did me a solid with trying to help me work on the platform. The one challenge on this project was that the stairs were missing between the street and the platform. Therefore, I had to climb an extension ladder to get up to the platform. I did that several times a day when I needed to use the bathroom and to go inside for coffee break and lunch. I only wanted to eat BLTs with cheddar cheese since that was my craving. I probably should have forced myself to eat more veggies. Oh well. I did mostly go with my cravings and dealt with losing the weight after having Johnny. I kept working out there on the platform as the weather got colder and colder. Normally, I love the colder weather since I tend to sweat less while working. Instead, it was the coldest to my bones experience in my entire life. I tried to wear extra layers and to keep constantly moving to combat the extra chill. It was a battle to wake up each morning in a warm bed and convince myself to go to work. I remember our shop steward, his nickname was Eats, since he loved food, asking me why couldn't I just go home for the rest of my pregnancy. I told him that I just could not afford to go out on disability since it didn't pay very well. I also didn't want to have to rush back to work and try to enjoy my infant for a period of time. Eats would tell me that he knows that I work hard and have nothing to prove to anyone. He was trying his best to convince me to go home. It was a few weeks later where Eats was finally able to convince me to pack it in. There was one particular day where we had freezing rain all damn day. On that particular day, I could not warm up to save my life. My teeth were chattering all damn day, and no break inside could help me stop shivering. Before I knew it, I couldn't take the freezing rain anymore. I was underneath the platform, sitting on a milk crate, shivering my ass off, and so mad about the situation that I was crying. Eats climbs down underneath there and right across from me while I was sitting on the crate. Eats finally convinced me that it was time to go home until it was time to give birth. He was concerned that I would be so cold that I would have a miscarriage on the train platform. He finally convinced me, and I agreed to go home. The guys helped me by bringing my tools to my truck. I go into the trailer to tell Harry that I was admitting defeat. He then playfully broke my chops with, "It's about damn time. I was waiting for you to tap out." I said my goodbyes and then went home on a 26-week disability claim, since there was no such thing as maternity or family medical leave at that time. Not long after going out on disability, the boyfriend opts to take a layoff. I can't tell you how much that infuriated me. Admittedly, I didn't put the pressure on my boyfriend to stay out there working. At the time, I didn't feel like I had a right to put that type of pressure on the guy. I'm used to owning my own responsibilities and bills and not asking anyone else to pick up my slack. I felt like he should have been compelled to just want to help me without even asking. I was more focused on following the doctor's strict orders and trying to carry the baby to term so that I could safely deliver him. Once I left work, my ankles swelled up really bad. It was kind of scary to see it. The toxemia was so bad, I was hospitalized twice. For the last 5 to 6 weeks, I was on strict orders for bed rest. I had to constantly lay on my side and only allowed to get up for the bathroom and my doctor's appointments. I was never so painfully bored in my entire life. I am not a TV person. I don't really watch TV shows. I don't watch sitcoms. Once in a while, I'll find something interesting, like a hit or miss, but I usually carve out time for writing or this podcast, so I'm not really a TV person, but I was literally forced to watch TV every day for weeks, and it felt like torture to me. I know some people love to veg on the couch and watch marathons of stuff, and it's just not really my thing. I was looking forward to doing some home improvement projects or something besides laying down and watching TV all damn day. I gained 5 pounds of water in one day towards the end of my pregnancy, so my gyno doctor determined that it was time to have me induced. After almost an entire day of active labor and a last-minute C-section, my 8-pound, 3-ounce John Robert was born. At the time, I was also suffering from carpal tunnel syndrome. I had to hang my hands off the side of the bed for a few years to avoid being woke up randomly in the middle of the night by pins and needles in my hands. Being pregnant amplified those damn symptoms. So as soon as my baby was born, I gave myself 6 weeks to recover and breastfeed. I then had the carpal tunnel surgery on my left hand first. I healed for about 6 weeks and then had surgery on the right hand. I wrapped my hands in shopping bags with duct tape to give my son a bath while my hands were numb. My hands did not feel normal for quite a long time. It took quite a while for the nerves to regrow so that I could get sensation and for it to not feel like there was something strange in the palm of my hand. My neurosurgeon who did the surgery said that my bands were the tightest that she's ever seen in her entire career. She said it snapped so tight like a rubber band, they almost felt like a piece was going to fly towards them. It was definitely a surgery that I needed, and I was grateful to have it done and have some relief. Before I knew it, it was time to go back to working with my crew. I struggled with adjusting to working with my numb hands, my C-section healing, and my new work/baby schedule. This wraps up another episode where I discuss the time when my crazy ass worked with the tools while I was pregnant. My goal was to give you a snapshot of what I had to do while working as a pregnant chick in construction. I do not recommend that you do this since it was super exhausting and can be quite hazardous. I do have that personality where I push myself and the envelope to see what I can do. This was my one and only time where I worked as an electrician with the tools in New York. If you think my 2004 pregnancy was rough, I had an even more rigorous schedule while pregnant in the Navy with my eldest back in 1994. My first pregnancy was accomplished while I served in the U.S. Navy Seabees as a constructionman electrician while stationed in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. I had to complete the military PT test regardless of the fact that I was pregnant. Thankfully, they allowed me to swim the 1.5 miles in lieu of running. I still had to do the required push-ups and sit-ups, though. I was in great shape, so I passed that fitness test with no problem. I requested and was able to leave the service because of becoming pregnant and wanting to go chase my Marine husband back to New York. After all of this, my goal is to make you feel absolutely terrible about wimping out while at your cushy desk job. No, I'm just kidding. Giving birth can cost you your life or the life of your child. Everyone's story is unique, and you should listen to your body. I was probably an absolute fool for taking that risk on the level that I did back then. Most of my union brothers and sisters looked out for me on the job. I didn't realize at the time that I was taking such a high risk by rigorously working with the tools while pregnant. There was no option for light duty, and I was pushed out of the easy job at the nursing home. If I had a penis and I was injured, I probably would have been able to stay in the job. Oh well, I survived, and so did my little baby. I had to ask another union sister as to what she did when she was pregnant, since I could not get advice from my union. Thankfully, I'm glad for others that conditions for women are much better today than they were 16 to 17 years ago. We now have the family medical leave options that previously didn't exist. I shall wrap this up by wishing you a good evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever on the globe that you represent. Try to enjoy the rest of your summer with your family and friends. For more information, head over to my website at www.constructiontales.com. Thank you for listening, and have a good evening. Peace out, Cub Scout. This wraps up another episode on the Verbally Disastrous podcast that can be found on Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. For more information, head over to www.constructiontales.com. Thank you for listening, and have a great one.